Hello, students. I welcome you to the last and concluding part of my discussion on Roland Barthes' essay, The Death of the Author. Uh, Thus far, we have tried to understand how Barthes differs with the traditional view that author is the source of the literary work, and the point of view of the author or the intention of the author is instrumental in understanding the meaning of the work. More importantly, during our last discussion, we also tried to trace the reasons for Roland Barthes' position, linking his views to some larger liberal humanist and modern rationalist assumptions about the literary text, author, and meaning, among which the view that the view about the underlying nature of meaning, that meaning is present and it needs to be uncovered, the underlying nature of meaning, the view about the fixed nature of meaning, that there is stability in meaning, the eternal nature of truth, everlasting nature of beauty. We saw that how the author acts as a cover for these larger assumptions, and Barthes, in challenging, invalidating, and in subverting the idea of the author, is also in a way expressing his disagreement with all these ideas. So today I will be discussing the last 4 paragraphs of this text, beginning with the paragraph the removal of the author is not merely an historical fact. I am beginning from this paragraph, and I will, to begin with, I will draw your attention to a very, very significant thing that Barthes says here. After saying that the author is thought to nourish the book, which is to say that he exists before it and is in the same relationship with his text as a father is to his child, Barthes gives a new definition of the author. And herein lies, we can say, the crux of this essay. Because Roland Barthes replaces the word author with scripter. I quote, "In complete contrast, the modern scripter is born simultaneously with the text, is in no way equipped with a being preceding or exceeding the writing, is not the subject with the book as predicate." And then he says that this is so because writing can no longer designate the operation of recording, representation, and depiction. So there are 3-4 things. One is that he introduces a new term. The term is scripter, and he will build his argument around this new term from here on. The connotations of the word author are closely associated with three things. Those three things are originality, creativity, and genius. And the function is of the author is to represent and to depict, to show us the truth. Now, by using the word scripter, Barths is bringing about a paradigm shift in our understanding of authorship. So, what began as the death of the author is now slowly taking the form of the birth of the scripter. So, as I said, the closest attributes associated with the figure of the author are originality, creativity, and genius, whereas the scripter has none of them. The scripter does not have originality, doesn't have genius, doesn't have creativity. So, if you understand the difference between author and the scripter, you can develop a proximity with the meanings of Barth's essay and the various implications of his position, which we will try to one by one construe at the end of this essay. So, the idea that authorship is linked with originality, creativity, and genius is abandoned when you rename the author as the scripter. And for Barths, the idea of the author is a flawed idea which was brought into existence by some clearly defined processes of socio-economic transformation of the society as part of the rise of capitalism. Because we have seen that he links the rise of individualism as a sub-theme of the expansion of capitalism, the transformation of society under capitalism, and the replacement of the pre-industrial societies by industrial modern societies. So, as I said, Barths links, first of all, he says that the idea of authorship, the modern idea of the author, is not a very old idea, it is a recent idea. And the genesis of this idea lies in the socio-economic transformation of the society. And we must remember that an important dimension of the rise of capitalism was cultural transformation of our society, where the pre-industrial communes and their culture was replaced by what we understand as modern culture. So, under this cultural transformation, societies which were agrarian became industrial. And what happens when a largely agrarian society gets transformed into an industrial society? The most common and most anticipated outcome would be that the society would adopt a new culture of literacy and education. So these societies, which were largely illiterate, became literate and educated societies. And the figure of the author is the need of these literate and educated societies. How? Because literature and art initially existed in oral forms, and as the society gets transformed, and as under the various processes which are a part of the rise of capitalism, literacy and education spread far and wide. Literature and art also become or they take the written form. They take the written form. So, as a consequence of the spread of literacy and education, art and literature, which existed in oral forms, begin to be produced more and more uh, in written forms. So, in part, we can say that the concept of the author, with its attributes of originality, creativity, and genius, was one of the chief requirements of the new and emerging market of printed books. Now, you can look at the author as a kind of a brand here. That selling books becomes important under the model of man and his work. So it becomes easier for, this is a view taken not only by Barths but by many other thinkers, that the concept of authorship is the requirement of the new market of printed books, what we call print capitalism. It becomes easier for printers to sell their books by converting the authors into some kind of brands under what I have called the model of man and his book, or man and his work. Now, after replacing the word author with scripter, Barths goes on to say that he now gives, as I said, the connotations of scripter are different, and the qualities of the scripter are different, the associations of scripter are different. And what are the associations of the scripter given by Barths? So, first of all, scripter is not responsible for representation and depiction. There is no burden on the scripter to show us the truth. He is no longer thought to be as the sole owner of his work. And then Barths makes a very important statement. I will read this statement for you. For him, on the contrary, the hand cut off from any voice, born by a pure gesture of inscription, traces a field without origin, which at least has no other origin than language itself. Language which ceaselessly calls into question all origins. Now, I think if we focus on this line carefully, we can come very close to the position taken by Barths. The scripter is not synonymous with a voice. The scripter is synonymous with a hand. Now, look at the difference. Voice is linked with consciousness, and hand is merely an instrument which according to Barthes, this is what he says, which according to Barthes performs the function of inscription in a domain without origin, because the only point of origin is language. There is nothing outside language. So we have here, I think it becomes amply clear that Barths, as part of his position, is foregrounding language. We'll come to the next word, textuality. So thus far, we can say he's foregrounding language as the constitutive principle of reality. There is no other point of origin other than language. And relegation, there is foregrounding of language and relegation, invalidation, subversion of author. I must remind you that when I concluded my last discussion, I told you that in post-structuralist position, language we can say that language is an unregulated system consisting of a chain of signifiers engaged in a relationship of differences, and there is nothing outside this chain of differences which constitutes language. So everything is constituted, is constituted. And so it is a linguistic approach which has a linguistic orientation. So if we take it to its logical next deduction which we can draw from it, that if author is a product of certain socio-cultural and economic processes which transformed society, so author is not an entity which can be understood in an idealized and essential way, but author is a construct, just like every other thing in this view would become a construct. So, after this, in the next paragraph, Barthes says, we know now that a text is not a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, the message of author God, but a multidimensional space in which a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. So, multidimensional space where variety of writings blend and clash. Link this with the idea of the scripter. The text is a tissue of quotations drawn from innumerable centers of culture. So he is again demolishing the idea of originality of the text, which was earlier linked to the consciousness of the writer, by saying or by introducing us to the idea of intertextuality. That every writing, every text is a multidimensional space where variety of writings blend and clash. So, writing is not something original, it is something which is linked to the established codes and conventions of writing, which already exist before any work comes into existence. Now, if we cobble together everything that Barths has said, we can say that the text, according to him, is not a personal accomplishment of a writer, but an outcome of social institutions which we can give the name of writing. So, writing is not an individual accomplishment, it is again a social practice, a social institution. And it is dependent on some pre-existing linguistic and literary codes, which, according to Barthes, enter a particular text through the scripter. So the scripter, as I said, is a medium. As I said, I used the expression the other day. He's a point in the chain of events. So, Barth says in the last part of this essay, on the basis of his belief that social life has a linguistic basis, proposing that we cannot look at any text as an original work of art. Cultural conventions, ideology. By ideology, I have been using this word, which it has several nuances and subtleties, but in a loose sense, it is connected with the viewpoint and beliefs of the dominant ruling class, which rationalize the economic superiority of the bourgeois classes. So one text is made up of multiple texts. So you can now link this with the earlier parts and kind of understand the whole text in a linear way, starting with Balzac's Saracen, and then reference to pre-industrial societies, how in pre-industrial societies, because of the prevailing orality of arts and culture, the figure of the author was always less important than the one who narrated the story, and then his reference to the French writers whose now coming back to the French writers, Mallarmé, his endorsement of these writers lies in the fact that, according to him, these writers are not conventional writers. They subvert the established conventions of realism, and they draw attention to the purely conventional nature of art, to the artificiality of literary texts, and they destroy any illusion that that literature represents social reality. This is what I meant by saying a representational model of art. So I hope you remember I gave you a definition of the definition of the author in traditional aesthetics, and there the author was defined as a unified self an autonomous entity or human subject who is a unique individual and who possesses the gift of creativity. You can link it with the 3 or 4 characteristics of individualism I gave to you in the form of a slide. Now let me tell you that Barths is not the only person who is decentering the author. The author can be decentered or looked upon as a disunified self from various positions. Roughly speaking, when you take the psychoanalytical position, where it is believed that the conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg and the rest of it is unconscious, and most of our motivations, drives are produced by our unconscious mind. So if you take that viewpoint, again you can decenter the author by saying that the author is neither autonomous nor coherent, and he is subject to some unconscious compulsions or psychosexual pressures. If you take a purely Marxist view, you can decenter the author and call him the subject of ideology. The author is produced by he is part of the dominant ideas circulating in the society. And if you take a Foucauldian view, who wrote a similar essay, What is an Author? There is a slight, this is no place to discuss that, but just to, without complicating things, author is linked to discursive formations which are a manifestation of the configurations of power. Now, if you say that the author is a subject of ideology, you will also have to keep the possibility open that the ideological ideas can be resisted and subverted. Now, Barths has a position, as I said, his position is a purely post-structuralist position in which the author is a scripter, a link, and a kind of a point in the chain of events. Now, by way of concluding, I have a list of some important assumptions that can be drawn from this essay about individualism, about the individual, about art, about representation, about agency, about many other things. I'll one by one read them for you. So the first thing which we can say by way of conclusion is that in this essay there is a reimagination of the representational relations in art. The mimetic function of art is questioned. There is a shift from representational aesthetics to the post-structuralist aesthetics of textuality. Secondly, the text questions the sovereignty of the individual, or we can also call it the autonomy of the individual. This is not something easy to do, because individual consciousness, or your consciousness of your individuality, is one of the factors which sustain life, which make you the person you are and which constitute your identity. So the autonomy of individual consciousness and the ideas of ethics and morality are questioned in this view of art. And when you devalue the individual and understand the idea of individualism as a and link it to some socio-cultural and historical developments, you you do a very important thing. You bring about a negation of agency, or in other words, you deny a connection between the poetic vision and social transformation. That it is not possible to transform the society through art. Then the idea of underlying meaning is present. Its nature is it is underlying, and it can be uncovered through recourse to the figure of the author. Then some liberal humanist ideas like the eternal nature of truth. This is again a very important idea. Man has always desired to understand life around us as ordered, systematic, and rational, or I can say purposeful. But here in Barths, you have a belief in the provisional nature of truth, that truth is provisional, contingent. It is dependent on what we have just called the socio-cultural, political, economic developments, which play a role in transforming the society. On the positive side, we can say that the idea of free play of meaning can be seen as liberating the text from the limitations and restrictions of accepted meanings. Then literature, as if you take Barth's view, you will have to see literature as a copy of a copy, as copy of a copy. So with this, we come to the end of our discussion on Roland Barthes' essay. Thank you very much.